Some people say mirrors only show reflections. But there is an old warning whispered in many places around the world. A warning most people laugh at, until it happens to them. They say that at 3:17 in the morning, the world becomes quiet for a reason. Because that is the moment when the line between our world and something else becomes thin. And if you ever wake up at that exact time, there is one thing you should never do. Never look into a mirror. Because sometimes, the reflection looking back at you isn't really yours. Tonight's story is called Never Look into a Mirror at 3:17 a.m. Chapter 1. The Legend of 3:17. In many small towns across Southeast Asia, there is a strange warning people whisper only late at night. It is not written in books. It is not spoken loudly in daylight. It is something older people mention only when the lights are low and the night grows quiet. They say there is a moment when the world becomes thin. Not midnight. Not 3 in the morning. But 3:17 a.m. At that exact minute, according to the old stories, the boundary between the living and the dead becomes fragile, like glass about to crack. Some believe it is when wandering spirits pass through the world unnoticed. Others say it is when forgotten souls search for something they lost long ago. But the warning is always the same. Never look into a mirror at 3:17 a.m. Because a mirror does more than reflect a face. It reflects what stands behind you. And sometimes, what stands behind you does not belong to the living. Many people laugh when they hear the legend. They say it is nothing more than superstition, a story invented to scare children or to make the night feel mysterious. But in several towns, there are records of strange incidents. People waking suddenly at 3:17 a.m. People standing in front of mirrors without remembering why. And in some rare cases, people who were found staring at their reflections with eyes wide open, as if they had seen something impossible. Something that should never have appeared in a mirror. Some of those mirrors were later removed. Some were covered. And some were simply left where they were, because no one wanted to touch them again. The strange thing is that those who experienced it all described the same feeling. The moment they looked into the mirror at 3:17 a.m., they realized something horrifying. The reflection was not wrong. The room was not different. The mirror had not changed. But the feeling was undeniable. For just one brief second, the reflection looked back first. And when that happens, the old warning says it is already too late. Because once something inside the mirror notices you, it may start waiting. Waiting for the next night. Waiting for the next 3:17 a.m. Waiting for you to look again. Chapter 2. The Old Mirror in Room 317. Nam moved into the boarding house at the beginning of the rainy season. It stood at the end of a narrow street where the streetlights flickered and the walls of the buildings were stained by years of humidity. The place was old, older than most of the houses around it, and the paint had long since faded into a dull gray. But the rent was cheap. For a university student trying to save money, that was enough reason to stay. The owner, an elderly woman with slow movements and tired eyes, handed him a small brass key. Room 317, she said. Nam didn't think much about the number. To him, it was just another room. Another temporary place to sleep, study, and spend quiet nights scrolling through his phone. The hallway leading to the room was long and dimly lit. The lights hummed softly above his head as he walked down the corridor. When he finally unlocked the door, it creaked open with a sound that echoed strangely in the narrow space. The room itself was small. A bed stood against the wall. A wooden desk sat near the window. And directly across from the bed, hanging on the opposite wall, was a large mirror. It was the first thing Nam noticed. The mirror looked old, far older than anything else in the room. Its frame was made of dark wood, carved with faint patterns that had almost worn away with time. The glass itself wasn't perfectly clear. A thin haze seemed to sit beneath the surface, as if the mirror had been breathing slowly for decades. Nam stepped closer to it. His reflection stared back at him. Normal. Nothing unusual. But something about the mirror made the room feel quieter. He turned to the hallway and called out to the owner. "Hey, was this mirror already here?" The old woman appeared slowly at the door. Her eyes moved to the mirror. And for a brief moment, her expression changed. "It's always been there," she said quietly. "How old is it?" She paused before answering. "Older than the building." Nam laughed softly. "That's impossible." The old woman didn't laugh with him. Instead, she simply said, "Some things stay where they are because no one wants to move them." Then she turned and walked away down the hallway. Nam shrugged. To him, it was just an old mirror in an old building. He unpacked his things, placed his books on the desk, and lay down on the bed. From where he rested, he could see the mirror perfectly. The room lights were off now, leaving only the pale glow of a street lamp outside the window. The mirror reflected the bed, the desk, the quiet room, and Nam, staring back at it without thinking. For a moment, he had the strange feeling that the mirror made the room feel deeper than it actually was. As if the reflection contained a space slightly larger than the room itself. But the thought quickly faded. Soon, the rain outside grew heavier. And before long, Nam fell asleep. He never noticed that the numbers on his phone quietly changed. 3:15 a.m. 3:16 a.m. And then 3:17.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 3. The knocking at 3:17. The first night in room 317 was quiet. Too quiet. Rain tapped softly against the window. And somewhere down the street a motorbike passed through the wet road before disappearing into the distance. Inside the room, the only sound was the faint ticking of Nam's phone charging beside the bed. He slept deeply at first. The kind of sleep that comes from exhaustion after moving all day. But sometime during the night, something pulled him out of that sleep. Not a loud noise. Not a nightmare. Just a faint sound that didn't belong. Knock. Nam shifted slightly in bed, half awake. For a moment he thought it was the rain hitting the window. Then it came again. Knock, knock. Slow. Soft. Deliberate. Nam opened his eyes. The room was dark except for the dim orange light leaking through the curtains from the street lamp outside. The shadows stretched across the walls in long quiet shapes. He reached for his phone and checked the time. 3:17 a.m. Nam frowned. The knocking came again. Knock. This time it sounded closer. He sat up in bed and listened carefully. The sound wasn't coming from the door. It wasn't coming from the window. And it definitely wasn't coming from the hallway. The sound was inside the room. Another knock. But now Nam could tell exactly where it came from. The wall in front of him. The place where the old mirror hung. He stared at it. The mirror reflected the room exactly as it was, the bed, the desk, the faint light from outside. Everything looked normal. Yet the silence around it felt heavy, as if the air itself had stopped moving. Nam waited. Nothing happened. For a moment he felt a little embarrassed. Maybe the noise had just been the building settling, old wood expanding from the rain. He lay back down, just as his head touched the pillow. Knock. This time it was louder. And it came from the mirror again. Nam froze. His eyes slowly turned toward the glass. The reflection of the room stared back at him, unchanged. But something about the mirror felt wrong now. Not the reflection. Not the position of the furniture. Something else. Something subtle. Something almost impossible to notice. Nam slowly sat up again. His heart beating a little faster now. He stared directly at his reflection. And for a brief moment, something strange crossed his mind. The reflection looked perfectly normal. Except for one small detail. Nam realized he couldn't remember seeing his reflection blink. The room was silent again. No more knocking. No movement. Just the mirror. Waiting quietly on the wall. And the glowing numbers on Nam's phone beside the bed. Still showing the same time. 3:17 a.m. Chapter 4. The reflection that moved late. The rest of the night passed slowly after the knocking stopped. Nam remained awake for a long time, staring at the mirror across the room. Every few minutes he checked his phone, expecting the time to change. But strangely it felt like the night itself had frozen. Eventually exhaustion returned. When morning light finally filled the room, everything looked normal again. The mirror reflected the sunlight. The bed. The desk. Nam himself, standing in front of it while brushing his hair. Nothing strange. Nothing frightening. By afternoon he had almost convinced himself the noise from the night before had just been part of an old building settling during heavy rain. Old houses made strange sounds all the time. Still, something about the mirror kept drawing his attention. Every time he passed it, he glanced at it. Not because he wanted to. Because something in the back of his mind felt uneasy. That evening Nam returned to the room late after studying at the library. The hallway lights buzzed faintly above him as he unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room felt slightly colder than usual. He closed the door and dropped his backpack on the chair. Then he looked at the mirror. For a moment, everything seemed ordinary. His reflection stood there just as expected. But when Nam tilted his head slightly, something strange happened. The reflection didn't move. Not immediately. For half a second, the figure in the mirror remained completely still. Then it slowly tilted its head. Following him, Nam frowned. He straightened his posture. The reflection followed normally this time. He raised his hand. The reflection raised its hand too. Exactly the same. Nam let out a small laugh under his breath. "You're just tired," he muttered to himself. He turned away from the mirror and walked toward the desk. But as he reached the chair, a sudden chill crawled down his spine. Nam turned back again. The mirror still showed the room. The bed. The desk. And the reflection of Nam standing near the chair. Except, Nam himself had already taken another step. But the reflection in the mirror had not moved yet. It was still standing where he had been a second earlier. Nam froze. Slowly, very slowly, the reflection took the missing step. As if it were trying to catch up. Nam's throat tightened. A cold silence filled the room. The reflection now matched his position again. Perfectly. Completely normal. If anyone had walked into the room at that moment, they would have seen nothing unusual. Just a student standing in front of an old mirror. But Nam knew what he had seen. The reflection had moved. Just a moment too late. And for some reason, the mirror now felt like it was watching him back.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 5. The woman behind him. That night, Nam couldn't concentrate on anything. He tried watching videos on his phone. He tried reading through his notes for tomorrow's class. But every few minutes, his eyes drifted back toward the mirror. It hung quietly on the wall across the room. Still. Silent. Unmoving. Yet the memory of what he had seen earlier refused to leave his mind. The delayed reflection. The way it seemed to catch up with him. As if something inside the mirror needed time to imitate him. By midnight, Nam finally decided he was just imagining things. He turned off the lights and lay down. Outside, the street had grown quiet. Even the rain had stopped, leaving the night strangely still. Nam slowly began to drift into sleep. Then suddenly, he woke up. Not because of a sound, but because of a feeling. The feeling that someone was standing nearby. Nam opened his eyes. The room was dark except for the dim orange glow from the street lamp outside. His heart beat slowly but heavily in his chest. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he reached for his phone. The screen lit up in the darkness. 3:17 a.m. A cold chill spread across his skin. Almost instinctively, his eyes moved toward the mirror. He told himself he would only glance at it for a second. Just to prove nothing was there. Nam slowly sat up. From the bed he could see his reflection clearly. The mirror showed the room exactly as it was. The bed. The desk. The pale light from outside. And Nam sitting on the edge of the mattress. Everything looked normal. But then something inside the reflection shifted. Nam felt his breath stop. Behind his reflection, there was someone standing there. A woman. Her long black hair hung down over her shoulders, partially hiding her face. Her skin looked pale, far too pale compared to the dim light in the room. She stood directly behind him. Close enough that if she were real, Nam would have felt her breathing against the back of his neck. But the room was silent. Completely silent. Nam's body went rigid. Slowly, carefully, he turned around. There was no one there. The space behind him was empty. Just the wall. Nam swallowed hard. His chest rising and falling faster now. He forced himself to look back at the mirror again. And this time, the woman was gone. Only his reflection remained. Nam stared at the glass for several seconds, trying to convince himself it had just been a trick of the light. A shadow. A dream. But deep down he knew something terrible. When he had turned around, he had felt something cold brush past him, as if someone had just stepped away from where they were standing. And the most terrifying thought of all slowly formed in his mind. If the woman had been behind him in the mirror, then where had she gone? Because she definitely wasn't inside the mirror anymore. Chapter 6. The old photograph. Nam barely slept after what he had seen. The image of the woman in the mirror replayed over and over in his mind. Her pale skin, the long black hair hiding part of her face, the way she had stood directly behind him as if she had always been there. And the worst part was the moment when he turned around. The room had been empty. Yet he had felt something cold brush past his shoulder. By morning, the fear had not disappeared. It had only changed into something else. Curiosity. Nam told himself there had to be an explanation. Old buildings, poor lighting, a tired mind. All of those things could play tricks on someone. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror knew something he didn't. Later that afternoon, Nam found the owner of the boarding house sitting near the entrance, slowly watering a row of dying plants. "Can I ask you something?" Nam said. The old woman looked up. "Yes?" Nam hesitated for a moment before speaking. "That mirror in my room, has it always been there?" The woman's watering can stop moving. For several seconds she didn't answer. Then she slowly placed the can down beside her chair. "Why do you ask?" Nam shrugged casually, trying to sound relaxed. "No reason. It just looks very old." The woman studied his face carefully, as if trying to read something he hadn't said out loud. Then she sighed. "Wait here." She stood up and walked slowly toward a narrow door near the back of the house. After a moment she disappeared inside. Nam stood quietly in the hallway. A strange feeling crept into his stomach. Several minutes later, the old woman returned. In her hands was a small faded photograph. She held it out toward him. "Look at this." Nam took the photo. It showed a young woman standing in front of the same boarding house many years ago. The picture was old and slightly damaged, but the face was still clear enough to recognize. Nam felt his fingers tighten around the edges of the photograph. His heart began to beat faster. The woman in the photo had long black hair, pale skin, and the same quiet expression. It was the exact woman he had seen in the mirror. Nam looked up slowly. "Who is she?" The old woman answered in a voice barely louder than a whisper. Her name was Lan. Nam swallowed. "Was?" The woman nodded slowly. "She stayed in the same room you're in now." Nam already knew what the next question would be, but he asked it anyway. "What happened to her?" The old woman looked toward the dark hallway leading to room 317. Her expression grew heavy. "She died." A cold silence filled the air. Nam stared at the photograph again. "An accident?" The woman shook her head. "No." Then she added quietly. "They found her standing in front of the mirror." Nam felt his stomach twist. "What do you mean standing?" The woman's eyes slowly returned to his. When they opened the door, she was still looking into it. Nam felt a chill crawl down his back. And the strangest thing, the old woman continued, was the time. Nam already knew the answer, but hearing it made the fear feel real. The old woman spoke the number slowly. 3:17 in the morning. Nam's grip on the photograph tightened. Because at that moment, a terrible thought entered his mind. If the woman in the mirror was Lan, then what had he seen the night before? And more importantly, why had she been standing behind him?
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 7. The death at 3:17. Nam couldn't stop staring at the photograph. Even after the old woman had finished speaking, the image of Lan remained frozen in his hands. The faded colors of the photo made the past feel distant, yet the face in it felt terrifyingly close. Too close. Because he had already seen that same face standing behind him in the mirror. The old woman watched him quietly. "You saw something, didn't you?" she asked. Nam hesitated. Part of him wanted to deny it, to laugh it off and pretend none of this mattered. But something in her voice made lying feel pointless. "I saw her," he admitted quietly. The old woman's expression darkened. "In the mirror?" Nam nodded. A long silence filled the hallway. Outside, the wind pushed against the loose metal sign hanging above the entrance, causing it to creak slowly back and forth. Finally, the woman spoke again. "You shouldn't look at that mirror at night." Nam forced a small laugh. "Why?" She didn't smile. "Because Lan wasn't the first." Nam felt his chest tighten. "What do you mean?" The old woman leaned back in her chair, her eyes drifting toward the staircase that led to the upper rooms. There were others before her. Nam felt the hallway grow colder. "How many?" The woman thought for a moment. "3 that I know of." Nam stared at her. "3 people died in that room?" She shook her head slowly. "No." Her voice dropped lower. "They didn't die in the room." Nam frowned. "Then where?" The woman looked directly into his eyes. "In front of the mirror." A chill spread through Nam's body. "They were all found the same way," she continued, standing there, looking into the glass. "None of them had injuries. None of them had signs of a struggle. It was as if something had simply stopped their hearts." Nam swallowed. "And the time?" he asked quietly. The old woman's answer came immediately. "Always the same." Nam already knew what she would say, but hearing it still made his skin crawl. 3:17 a.m. The number echoed in his mind. The same time he had woken up the night before. The same time he had seen Lan behind him in the mirror. Nam looked down at the photograph again. Something about the picture suddenly bothered him. He leaned closer. The photo showed Lan standing in front of the boarding house. But in the background, through the open doorway, Nam could see a faint reflection. A mirror inside the hallway. And in that reflection, there was someone else standing behind Lan. A shadow. Tall. Still. Watching her. Nam's hands began to shake. "Who is that?" he whispered. The old woman leaned forward to see the photograph. For a moment her eyes widened. Then she slowly leaned back in her chair. "That's strange," she murmured. Nam looked up. "What?" The old woman's voice sounded distant now. "That photo was taken when Lan first moved in." Nam's heart pounded harder. "So?" The woman looked back at him with a pale expression. "She lived alone." A cold silence filled the hallway. Nam looked at the photograph again. The shadow behind Lan stood perfectly still. Watching. Waiting. And suddenly Nam realized something terrifying. The shape in the reflection looked tall. Much taller than Lan. Much taller than him. And the position where it stood was exactly where someone would be standing if they were inside the mirror. Chapter 8. The Mirror That Watches. Nam returned to room 317 just before sunset. The hallway felt different now. Earlier that morning it had simply been an old building corridor, dim lights, peeling paint, and the faint smell of damp wood. But after hearing the old woman's story, every step toward the room felt heavier. As if he were walking somewhere he shouldn't go. When he unlocked the door, it creaked open slowly. The room looked exactly the same. The bed, the desk, the window, and the mirror hanging quietly on the wall. Nam stood in the doorway for several seconds without entering. For the first time since moving in, the room didn't feel empty. It felt like something inside was waiting. Finally he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The mirror reflected the movement immediately. Everything looked normal. But now that he knew what had happened to the others, he couldn't look at the glass without feeling a strange pressure in his chest. Nam walked closer. His reflection stared back at him. Tired eyes. Messy hair. A nervous expression he couldn't hide anymore. "You're just imagining things," he whispered. The reflection whispered the same words silently. Nam leaned closer. The surface of the mirror looked old, almost cloudy in certain places. When he moved his head slightly, the glass caught the fading sunlight from the window and scattered it into faint, dull streaks. For a moment he thought he saw movement behind the reflection. He turned around quickly. Nothing. Just the empty room. Nam exhaled slowly. But when he turned back toward the mirror, a strange realization crept into his mind. The reflection looked deeper than before. Not wrong. Not distorted. Just deeper. As if the room inside the mirror extended farther than the real one. Nam frowned and stepped closer again. Something about the glass pulled his attention. Then he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. His reflection was staring directly at him. That wasn't strange by itself. But the expression on the reflection's face felt slightly different. Nam wasn't smiling. Yet the reflection looked almost like it was about to. Only for a second. Then the expression disappeared. The reflection returned to normal. Nam stepped back quickly. His heartbeat growing louder in his ears. That's when he noticed something even worse. The mirror reflected the entire room clearly. But one part of the reflection didn't match reality. Behind Nam in the mirror, the door of the room appeared slightly open. Nam slowly turned around. The real door behind him was closed. Locked. Nam felt a cold wave run down his spine. When he looked back at the mirror again, the door inside the reflection slowly moved. And quietly, it began to open. From the inside.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 9. The knocking from inside the glass. Nam stood frozen in the center of the room. The mirror reflected him clearly, the pale light from the window. The bed behind him, the narrow walls of room 317. But the door in the reflection was no longer closed. Inside the mirror, it was slowly opening. Nam's breath grew shallow. He turned around immediately. The real door behind him remained shut and locked. The metal handle didn't move. No sound came from the hallway. For several seconds Nam stood there, staring at the door, waiting for it to open. Nothing happened. The silence was heavy. Too heavy. Slowly, carefully, Nam turned back toward the mirror. The reflection showed the door fully open now. Inside the mirror's version of the room, the hallway beyond looked darker than the real one, almost completely swallowed by shadow. Nam's heart began to pound harder. "Okay, this isn't funny," he muttered to himself. But the mirror did not respond. The reflection remained still. Nam took a cautious step closer. And then he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it. Knock. Nam froze. The sound came again. Knock, knock. His eyes slowly moved toward the mirror. The sound was coming from the glass. Not from behind the wall. Not from the hallway. From the mirror itself. Nam stepped back instinctively. Another knock echoed through the room. But this time it sounded heavier. Closer. Knock. The surface of the mirror trembled slightly. Not enough to crack. Just enough to ripple like water disturbed by a falling stone. Nam felt his stomach twist. Something was on the other side. Something trying to reach him. Then suddenly, a shape appeared in the reflection. Not clearly. Just a dark silhouette standing in the hallway inside the mirror. It was tall. Too tall to be a normal person. The shape moved slowly toward the open doorway. Nam's breathing stopped. Step. 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 The figure grew closer inside the reflection. But the real room behind Nam remained empty. Another knock slammed against the glass. Bang. This time Nam saw it clearly. A hand. Pressed from the other side of the mirror. The surface of the glass bent outwards slightly under the pressure. As if something inside were pushing against it. Trying to force its way through. Nam stumbled backward until his legs hit the bed. The hand remained pressed against the mirror. Long fingers. Thin. Unnatural. Then the hand slowly slid downward across the glass, leaving behind faint streaks that looked almost like fingerprints. Nam's heart pounded violently in his chest. Because the hand was too large to belong to Lan. Too large to belong to any normal person. And as the shape behind the mirror stepped closer to the doorway, Nam realized something horrifying. The figure was not alone. Behind it, more shadows were moving in the darkness. Waiting. Watching. And the knocking against the mirror suddenly started again. But now it came from many different hands. Chapter 10. The third reflection. The knocking stopped. Suddenly. Completely. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise itself. Nam remained pressed against the edge of the bed. His eyes locked on the mirror across the room. His chest rose and fell rapidly as he tried to steady his breathing. The hand that had been pressing against the glass was gone. The mirror looked still again. Perfectly smooth. Perfectly quiet. As if nothing had ever touched it. Nam swallowed hard. Maybe the mirror had simply reflected a shadow from outside. Maybe exhaustion and fear had twisted his imagination into something far worse than reality. Slowly, he stood up. One careful step at a time. He moved closer to the mirror again. The reflection of the room appeared normal. The bed behind him. The desk near the window. The dim orange streetlight spilling across the floor. And Nam himself standing in front of the glass. Nothing strange. Nothing moving. Nam exhaled slowly, trying to calm his nerves. But then he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. There were two reflections of him in the mirror. Nam blinked. The first reflection stood exactly where it should, directly in front of him, copying every movement he made. But the second reflection stood slightly behind the first, only half visible, its face partially hidden in shadow. Nam froze. He lifted his right hand slowly. The first reflection lifted its hand at the same time. The second reflection did not move. Nam's throat went dry. "Okay, that's not possible," he whispered. The mirror remained silent. Nam took a small step to the side. The first reflection followed him instantly. But the second reflection stayed where it was, standing still, watching. Nam felt his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then something even worse happened. The second reflection slowly lifted its head. Its face came into the light. It was Nam. But the expression was wrong. The eyes looked darker, hollow, and the mouth slowly stretched into a thin, unnatural smile. Nam stumbled backward. The first reflection copied the movement immediately. But the second reflection stayed exactly where it stood. Still smiling. Still watching. Then the glass shifted slightly. And for a brief moment Nam saw something terrifying. There was a third reflection. Standing deeper inside the mirror. Almost hidden behind the other two. It looked exactly like Nam. Except this one wasn't smiling. Its face was completely blank. Its eyes staring directly through the glass. As if studying him carefully. Waiting. Nam's breathing became shallow. Because the third reflection suddenly leaned forward. Closer to the surface of the mirror. And in a voice so faint it barely existed, Nam heard something whisper from the glass. Soon. The word echoed softly in the quiet room. And all three reflections slowly turned their heads, looking at him. At the same time.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 11. The room inside the mirror. Nam could barely breathe. The whisper from the mirror still echoed faintly in his ears. Soon. The word had been soft, almost impossible to hear, yet it carried a weight that made the room feel colder. Across from him, the mirror still hung quietly on the wall. But now Nam knew something terrible. The mirror was not just reflecting the room. It was hiding something behind it. For several seconds, he didn't move. The three reflections inside the glass slowly faded until only one remained, the normal reflection that mimicked his movements perfectly. Nam stared at it, trying to convince himself that what he had seen moments earlier had only been a hallucination. A trick of the mind. A nightmare he hadn't fully woken up from. He stepped closer. The reflection stepped closer. Perfectly synchronized. Nam leaned toward the glass. The reflection leaned toward him. Everything seemed normal again. Then the surface of the mirror shifted. Not like glass. More like dark water. A slow ripple spread across it, distorting the reflection of the room. Nam froze. The ripple widened. And suddenly the mirror no longer showed room 317. Instead, it revealed another room. It looked almost identical to Nam's. Same bed. Same desk. Same mirror. But everything inside looked darker. Older. The walls were stained with dark marks that looked like water damage, or something worse. Nam's heart pounded violently. Because someone was standing inside that other room. Not just one person. Many. At least 10 figures stood scattered throughout the reflection. All of them facing the mirror. All of them staring directly at Nam. Their skin looked pale. Their eyes hollow. Their bodies motionless. As if they had been standing there for a very long time. Nam stepped backward in shock. But the figures inside the mirror did not move. They simply watched him. Then one of them slowly stepped forward. A woman. Long black hair. Pale face. Nam recognized her instantly. Lan. She approached the mirror slowly until her face was only inches away from the surface of the glass. Her eyes locked onto Nam's. And for the first time, her lips moved. Nam couldn't hear the words. But he could read them. 3 words. You saw us. Nam felt his legs weaken. Behind Lan, the other figures began moving. Slowly. Step by step. Gathering behind her. As if waiting for something. Or someone. Nam realized something horrifying. They were not trying to escape the mirror. They were waiting for someone else to enter it. And suddenly Lan lifted one hand. She pressed it gently against the glass. On Nam's side of the mirror. The surface bulged outward slightly. Like something pushing through from the other side. Nam's chest tightened. Because the room inside the mirror was no longer empty behind him. When he looked at the reflection again, he saw someone standing in the doorway. Someone tall. Completely dark. Watching both worlds at the same time. And Nam suddenly understood the terrifying truth. The mirror was not a window. It was a door. And every night at 3:17 a.m., it slowly began to open. Chapter 12. The Woman Who Waits at 3:17. Nam stumbled backward until the back of his legs hit the edge of the bed. His eyes never left the mirror. Lan's hand was still pressed against the glass. From the other side, her pale fingers spread slowly across the surface as if she were trying to feel the world outside. The glass bent outwards slightly beneath the pressure. Like something thin and fragile separating 2 places that were never meant to touch. Nam's voice trembled. What do you want? The question barely left his mouth. But inside the mirror, Lan reacted. Her head tilted slowly to one side. Then she did something unexpected. She shook her head. Not violently. Just once. Slowly. As if the question itself was wrong. Nam felt confusion mixed with fear. You're trying to get out, right? Lan's expression didn't change. Behind her, the other figures stood in silence. Watching. Waiting. Then Lan's lips moved again. Nam leaned closer to the mirror. Trying to understand. This time he could read the words clearly. We can't leave. A cold chill ran through his entire body. What do you mean? He whispered. Lan slowly lowered her hand from the glass. Then she pointed past Nam. Toward the mirror itself. Nam followed the gesture. His eyes moved to the surface of the glass. At first he saw nothing unusual. Just his reflection in the dim room behind him. But then he noticed something strange. His reflection was not standing exactly where he was. It stood closer to the mirror. Much closer. So close that its face was almost touching the glass. Nam instinctively stepped backward. The reflection didn't move. Lan's lips moved again. It's already watching you. Nam's heart pounded violently. What is? Lan didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowly turned her head. Looking toward the dark doorway inside the mirror room. The tall shadow still stood there, motionless, its shape darker than the surrounding darkness. Nam felt his breath catch. "That thing?" he whispered. Lan nodded once. Her eyes returned to Nam. And for the first time, there was something different in her expression. Not anger. Not hatred. Fear. Then she spoke again silently. 3 words that made Nam's blood run cold. "It chooses someone." Nam shook his head. No, that's not." Before he could finish the sentence, something inside the mirror moved. The tall shadow in the doorway stepped forward. Its body stretched unnaturally tall as it entered the dim light of the mirror room. The other figures immediately stepped aside, as if making space for it. Nam felt the air in the room grow colder. Lan backed away slowly from the mirror, her expression filled with quiet dread. And as the shadow approached the glass, Nam realized something horrifying. It had no face. Only a dark surface where a face should be. Like a reflection that had never been given a human form. Then the shadow stopped directly behind Lan. And a deep cracking sound echoed through room 317. A thin line slowly appeared across the surface of the mirror. A crack. Nam's heart nearly stopped. Because the crack didn't spread across the glass. It spread outward. Like something inside was pushing the door open. And the digital clock on Nam's phone beside the bed quietly changed. 3:16 a.m. The next minute was coming. 3:17.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 13. When the mirror opens. The crack in the mirror grew slowly. At first it was only a thin line stretching across the surface of the glass. But within seconds, smaller cracks began branching out from it like veins spreading across frozen ice. Nam couldn't move. His entire body felt locked in place as he stared at the mirror. On the other side, Lan had stepped back into the dim room beyond the glass. The other pale figures had also moved away, forming a silent circle around the tall shadow that now stood closest to the mirror. The faceless figure. The one Lan had warned him about. Nam's breathing became shallow. "What are you?" he whispered. The shadow didn't answer. Instead, it slowly raised one long arm. Its hand, if it could even be called a hand, was stretched and unnatural, with fingers that seemed slightly too long. Then it placed that hand against the mirror. On Nam's side of the room, the cracked glass bulged outward. Another sharp crack echoed through the room. Nam stepped back instinctively. The air suddenly felt colder. Much colder. It felt as if the temperature inside room 317 had dropped several degrees in a matter of seconds. Behind the shadow, Lan shook her head desperately. Her lips moved again. Nam focused on the words. "Don't let it see you." But it was already too late. The faceless figure tilted its head slightly. Even without eyes, Nam could feel that it was looking directly at him. Studying him. Choosing him. The cracks in the mirror widened. A dull grinding sound filled the room as the surface of the glass began to warp and bend like something soft instead of solid. Then the impossible happened. The hand on the other side slowly pushed through. Not breaking the glass. Passing through it. Like pushing through water. Nam's heart slammed against his ribs. A long dark arm emerged from the mirror, followed by the shoulder. Then part of the creature's upper body. The air around the mirror grew thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. Lan and the other trapped figures began moving frantically inside the mirror room. Some pounded against the glass. Others tried pulling the shadow back. But nothing stopped it. The creature continued pushing forward. Step by step. Crossing the thin boundary between the two worlds. Nam stumbled backward again until his back hit the wall. His mind screamed for him to run. But his legs refused to move. The shadow finally paused halfway through the mirror. Its faceless head turned slowly toward Nam. Then, in a voice that sounded like many whispers layered together, it spoke. "Every door needs someone to stay behind." Nam felt the meaning of those words sink into his chest like ice. Behind the creature, Lan looked at him with desperate eyes. She shook her head again. and silently mouthed one final warning. Run before it finishes. But Nam's eyes suddenly drifted to the digital clock on his phone. The numbers had just changed. 3:17 a.m. And the shadow began stepping fully into the room. Chapter 14. The Replacement. The shadow stepped completely into the room. The moment its second foot touched the floor of room 317, the air seemed to collapse inward. The walls felt closer, the darkness heavier, and the silence so deep that Nam could hear nothing but his own heartbeat pounding violently in his ears. The creature stood taller than any person Nam had ever seen. Its body was long and thin, its shape shifting slightly like smoke trying to hold a human form. And where a face should have been, there was nothing. Just a smooth, endless darkness. Nam pressed himself against the wall. His legs trembled so badly he could barely stand. Behind the creature, the mirror still showed the other room, the dim place where Lan and the others remained trapped. Lan was pounding against the glass now. Her lips moved urgently. Run. But Nam couldn't move. The creature slowly tilted its head toward him. Then it spoke again in that low whisper made of many overlapping voices. One must stay. Its long arm lifted slowly. Nam felt an invisible pressure tightening around his chest. The creature took one slow step closer. The mirror behind it rippled like dark water. Inside the reflection, the trapped figures were moving frantically now. Lan shook her head violently. Her hands struck the glass again and again. Nam forced himself to speak. Why me? The creature's whisper echoed softly through the room. Because you looked. The words felt heavy and final. Nam remembered the warning from the old legend. Never look into a mirror at 3:17 a.m. But he had looked. And now the door had opened. The creature extended its long hand toward him. The air around Nam twisted. Suddenly he felt something pulling him backward. Not toward the creature. Toward the mirror. Nam gasped. His body slid across the floor as if dragged by invisible hands. No. His back hit the surface of the mirror. But the glass wasn't solid anymore. It felt cold and liquid. Like falling into freezing water. Nam's hands clawed desperately at the air as he was slowly pulled backward into the mirror. Inside the reflection, Lan was reaching toward him. Her eyes filled with horror. But she couldn't stop it. The faceless creature watched silently. Nam's shoulders passed through the glass. Then his chest. Then his arms. The cold darkness swallowed him piece by piece. The last thing Nam saw before disappearing completely was Lan's face. And the terrible realization in her eyes. She knew exactly what was happening. The moment Nam vanished inside the mirror, the creature turned slowly toward the glass. Its shadowy body began to shrink. Its shape twisting. Changing. Until finally, standing in the center of room 317, there was a person again. A young man. With messy hair, pale skin, and frightened eyes. The creature had taken Nam's place. And inside the mirror, the real Nam now stood among the others. Trapped. Watching the world outside through the glass. Waiting. Just like they had. For someone else to look. At 3:17 a.m.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 15. The Next Person Who Looks. Morning came slowly to the old boarding house. Sunlight slipped through the narrow hallway windows and spread across the worn wooden floors. The night felt distant now, like something that had never really happened. Room 317 was quiet. Too quiet. The mirror hung on the wall exactly where it had always been. Its cracked surface had somehow returned to normal. No fractures. No ripples. Just an old piece of glass reflecting the empty room. Hours passed. Sometime in the afternoon, the old woman who owned the boarding house climbed the stairs slowly with a spare key in her hand. She knocked once on the door of room 317. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. With a tired sigh, she unlocked the door and pushed it open. The room was empty. Nam's backpack lay on the floor beside the desk. His phone rested on the bed. But Nam himself was gone. The old woman stood silently in the doorway. She didn't seem surprised. Not really. After a moment, she stepped inside and looked toward the mirror. For several seconds she simply stared at it. Then she whispered softly, almost like someone repeating an old, familiar truth. It happened again. The mirror reflected the room calmly. But deep within the glass, something moved. Very slightly. Almost impossible to notice. Inside the reflection, several figures stood in the dim room beyond the glass. Among them was a new face. Nam. His expression was pale and confused as he stared outward through the mirror. Trapped. Just like the others. Watching the world he could no longer reach. The old woman covered the mirror with a dark cloth. Just as she had done before. Days passed. Then weeks. Eventually, a new student arrived looking for a cheap place to stay. The old woman handed him a key. Room 317, she said. The young man walked down the hallway and opened the door. The room looked ordinary. A bed. A desk. A window. And a large mirror hanging on the wall. He stepped closer to it, curious. Old mirror, he murmured. Behind the glass, the trapped figures watched silently. Nam pressed his hands against the surface from the inside. Trying to warn him. Trying to scream. But no sound could pass through the mirror. Outside the window, night slowly fell. Hours passed. The student lay down on the bed and fell asleep. The room grew darker. The mirror waited quietly on the wall. Then the phone beside the bed lit up. The digital clock changed. 3:16 a.m. Inside the mirror, the figures began to move. Slowly gathering near the glass. Watching. Waiting. The clock changed again. 3:17 a.m. The student woke up suddenly. Not because of a sound. But because he felt something strange. Like someone was standing nearby. His eyes slowly turned toward the mirror. And just before he looked into it, from the other side of the glass, something knocked. Knock. Some stories end when the night is over. But this one doesn't. Because somewhere, in an old room with an old mirror, the clock is slowly moving toward 3:17 a.m. again. And someone else will wake up. Someone else will feel that strange feeling, that they are not alone. And when they turn to look at the mirror, something on the other side will already be waiting. So tonight, if you wake up suddenly and see the clock showing 3:17 a.m., you might want to remember this story. And whatever you do, don't look into the mirror.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.